Hello and welcome back to the Talent Acquisition Matters podcast with me, Thomas Dove, founder of Fraser Dove, the life science talent consultancy. I'm so excited for today's episode that is all about the power of employees to be your voice in talent attraction. I'm joined by none other than Brian at CultureHQ. How are you doing?
Doing excellent. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. I first found out about Brian from a customer of mine, a VP of talent acquisition for a scale-up biotech firm in the US. This particular customer had created some outstanding assets to share with potential candidates. Their career site was fantastic. They had recorded a podcast series with the senior leadership team. This gave a great insight into how they work, how they communicate, and how their values shine through. Also, there was a lot of cool and relevant video content from employees at a lot of different levels. So I asked the TA leader how he managed to collate all of this information together and how they'd come up with the ideas. That's when CultureHQ and Brian was recommended. So I connected, and now here we are. After only about 5 minutes, I knew Brian was the right person and right at the forefront of storytelling. And it's such a congested recruitment market at the moment. It's vitally important. So making a potential employer stand out is what Brian was all about. And I just had to get him onto the podcast today. So Brian, do you want to take a moment or two just to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. So thanks again for having me. So I'm Brian Vigeant. I'm one of the co-founders of CultureHQ. And I guess I can just give a quick intro of CultureHQ as well. So I think you shared a little bit on or alluded to what we're doing, but we are a novel, a talent attraction engine that's really trying to help companies tell their story in a more authentic way through the lens of employees. And ultimately, we want to help a company tell that story in a way that's going to reach candidates where they are and how they're ultimately sort of looking to join a company.
Yeah, excellent. And I mean, right now, this couldn't be any more pertinent. I think the talent ecosystem, as we can all see on things like LinkedIn, some companies are doing things really well. Other companies are non-existent. Can't see them at all. So Brian, Harvard Business Review states that 9 out of 10 candidates want to hear from companies' employees before they decide whether to work for them or not. Why do you think that has evolved so much?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the pandemic has certainly changed everything. I think when you look at sort of how employees or candidates are thinking about a business, I mean, there's this great reshuffle happening since COVID took place where people are thinking very differently about their careers and their employers. And you see this sort of much higher accountability that's on employers to treat employees right. And there's been some examples where you start seeing how the employer brand is really impacting the consumer brand. And there were several examples. I saw a couple that in like Canada, I think in particular, where there's this company, Tim Hortons, which is like the Dunkin' Donuts of sort of the East Coast here. And Tim Hortons, I don't know if they put a statement out, but they were basically saying that they were treating employees where they were like not going to pay them for their breaks. They weren't going to give them benefits. And once consumers heard about that, they actually put like this, like I forget the actual term, it was like no Timmy Tuesdays or something like that. And you saw how the consumers of the brand, once they heard that the employees were being treated or mistreated, they wanted to do something different. They're like, you know what, we're not going to be a part of that brand. So now you start seeing that there's this higher accountability on brands to treat their employees right, which then really puts the onus on them to really showcase like what they're doing, what their culture is like. And that's what employees or potential employees are looking for. And so that's where you see this 9 out of 10. I think that's been a stat that's been around for a few years, but you really see that today being even more powerful and more important for how someone is kind of evaluating a company. And I would say that like when you look at the information that exists out there, like Glassdoor, there's all these different sort of research that you can do on a company. And a lot of that, it's kind of hard to like read through the details. Like if you see a company kind of boast, like if you just think of from a consumer standpoint, if a company is boasting about their product and they're saying, oh, we have the best product that you can see, are you going to trust that alone in making your purchasing decision? Of course not. I mean, you want to hear from actual customers on how they're using it. But reviews alone are really hard to kind of see or seek out the truth, I guess, and sort through the noise. But for me, at least, when I see videos of actual customers talking about how the product has changed their life and how they use it, that really makes all the difference for me to kind of put myself in the shoes and be like, you know what, that product is actually going to work. And so that really translates into kind of the employer market of how can you tell a story that's really showcasing the employees' experiences, because that's really going to make the difference on why, you know, a potential candidate is going to trust you and, you know, believe that you're the right company for them.
Yeah, I like that dynamic. It's not something that I've thought of in that sense from a consumer product to potential employee company standpoint. Yeah. It's a really nice way of putting it. And a lot of companies have kind of focused on more traditional recruitment methods to hire talent. Do you think that there should be a change in prioritization and maybe looking at employer branding and talent attraction as a funnel of potential candidate sourcing?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think when we sort of embarked into this space where we've been around for 3.5 years, and our story is interesting because we came from the internal standpoint of thinking about culture from the internal standpoint, and then we evolved to kind of painting the picture from the inside out of how do you really take what it looks like internally and displaying that externally. So that's where CultureHQ has learned a lot, where we've talked to a ton of recruiters and heads of talent and employer brand leaders and trying to understand, like, how are they ultimately attracting talent into their org. And when you think of talent acquisition, I feel like traditionally, or at least as I was learning, it seemed like everything was very transactional in the way that people were recruiting talent, where it was like, we have these 30 roles that we have to fill. Now let's go out and fill them. Let's have some recruiters in-house. We might have a staffing agency to help us fill these roles. And it's very transactional in the way that you're thinking about it. And I'm like, well, that just doesn't seem like the most effective way, especially now in what's probably the most competitive talent market that's ever existed. It's how do you really tell a better story to attract talent? And this sort of goes into, like, when you think of from, again, less from a consumer standpoint, but like as a business, when you're marketing your company and your product, typically companies are not just deploying a sales force and that's it. They're not just stopping at like having 3 salespeople start cold calling customers and reaching out on LinkedIn to try to prospect. They're deploying a marketing strategy of how do we really drive awareness to our brand and fill the funnel with people. And I hadn't really seen that too often, where companies were thinking about it of like, how do we develop an inbound strategy to really bring people to us versus us always going to them. And that's where, if you really can just think about employment brand and thinking about storytelling, and we can dig deep into this further, but that's where if you're really allowing your employees to have a voice and showcase what's so unique and special about your company, and being able to amplify that across channels, whether it's on LinkedIn, on your career site, on different forums and blogs, if you can let that shine, that's ultimately going to transition you from selling why you're so special to then becoming more of like a buyer of being able to choose which candidates, you know, you ultimately want to join your company.
Absolutely. And I liked that the topic there about kind of almost marketing style, you know, creating a community of potential candidates. We know it's about timing. When you find the right candidate at the right time to fill that one open vacancy, that is part of the 30 roles that you spoke about at the beginning. Yeah. But those 30 roles, if you're working with a scale-up company, you're filling another 30 another month, another 60 another month. So all of a sudden you actually need this kind of evergreen candidate base that maybe if they're not right for you right now, you want to still be able to engage with them, still get your voice out to them and still show them who you are so that when the right role comes at the right time, that they're ready to go.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that that's quite often missed. It's like, okay, the candidate wasn't right for that one job. Away they go. We now got to go and find exactly the same one in 3 months' time. And you kind of hear, you know, talent acquisition people forgetting about these. And it is a bit of a challenge. I think one of the other interesting moments that you spoke about a second ago was like seeing people. So I did or seeing the employees, seeing people within the company. I did a really interesting podcast the other day where one of the TA leaders said, quite rightly, you know, I like to see people that look like me. and it's from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, it's a really good opportunity to showcase actually who you are. Have you found that many of your customers have, really been able to use this as a tool to showcase more of the D&I topics within their business?
Yeah, 100%. I think there was a stat that I saw that one of the most important or most impactful metrics, or less of a metric, but most impactful ways for how you can recruit and attract diverse talent is by just displaying the people within your organization of how the inclusiveness of the culture actually looks and is portrayed like in actuality. So like being able to highlight stories of individuals that exist within your company and being able to bring that to the forefront and showing that, hey, regardless of where you come from, backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, race, ethnicity, you can exist here and you will belong. And being able to like showcase that legitimately through stories is an extremely powerful way to attract that talent. Because I think, again, when people think about hiring diverse, it's all about numbers, it's all about metrics, and people kind of lose this sort of emotional connection of how can you just tell a story that's ultimately going to help someone envision themselves at your company. And that's one powerful way, of course, through DEI, of how you can help kind of showcase to different people why your place is going to be a place that they would belong. So I think that's a lot of people aren't really thinking that way, I would say. And I mean, in some cases, it can come across sort of inauthentic, where I think in an age of where DEI has become so important that you've seen so many messages put out by companies that it feels inauthentic. It was like, all right, in the US, of course, when everything happened with George Floyd, you saw everyone kind of rushing, CEOs and leaders putting out messages on, we stand for this and we have an inclusive culture. And then the employees are like, what? No, we don't. Like, that's not
the
true.
reality is different.
Yeah, the reality is completely different. And so you have like leadership and brand and marketing kind of putting out these messages or putting it on their website, like, here's our values, here's our DEI, we stand for equality. But then when you actually peel back the onion, that doesn't exist. So no better way to really walk the walk by being able to showcase your employees' voices and who your employees are and where you stand in your journey. Like, you might not be, in a lot of cases, companies aren't going to be like far along in their DEI journey, but be transparent and bold about that and be able to be like, you know what, here's where we are today. And you know what, we're ultimately working very hard to build an inclusive culture. And regardless of where you come from, you will belong. And here's how we do treat you when you walk into the culture.
Yeah. Take the stock images off your website. That you got 5 other competitors in the space that all have the same employees. I don't think so. Take those take those off the website, put your actual real people on there. That's the thing. With those kind of proactive moments that you're talking about earlier, where there are different movements that happen, what I always find quite interesting is, 6 months down the line, is that voice still the same? Or was it just very reactionary about that moment? More often than not, it is. And then they go straight back to the vanilla stuff.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So a lot of our listeners work for companies or work with companies that are scaling at speed. I'm interested to understand how you think companies like this that are maybe time short, but they need people in order to take their next step in their mission. What's the best way that they can curate the right hiring assets or candidate attraction assets to then put out there into the social world?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what I have noticed is that too often, I think people overcomplicate this and get so fearful of what they're projecting externally. How are people going to perceive us? Is it going to be the right message? Are we going to sort of dissuade talent from coming into our org? And so then it becomes that cookie cutter approach, that vanilla type messaging, where now you're trying to be everything to everybody, and now you're nothing to everybody.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to stand out. Everything sounds the same. And I think a lot of people have historically just done like, here are our values. We treat each other with respect. We work hard. We play hard. We have great benefits. It's the same type of messaging that ultimately doesn't help you to showcase your uniqueness But I think people do that because they overcomplicate it and they get fearful of what their uniqueness actually is. And so I think it's really just twofold of curating your story and understanding this. And really the first one is understanding the market conditions and ultimately what top talent is looking for. That's sort of number one. And then number two is really understanding your employees and why they chose to work for you, what they love about the culture, what matters most to them, and why they're still excited to work here. Understanding sort of those two audiences of what are candidates and top talent looking for and what is the market dictating right now, and then ultimately understanding your employee base. So that's sort of like the twofold approach to thinking about this. And then it becomes be human with your messaging. So now you understand, okay, here's what the market is looking for. Here's what candidates are thinking about and is top of mind. And then here's what our employees love about what we are. Now let's be authentic and really make that shine kind of across the different channels. So that's where I think you can be intentional with the stories that you're collecting of asking very specific questions to your employees that are the questions that candidates have, and being able to then highlight your employees' responses and perspectives on that. And then ultimately, so you're capturing these questions and these answers from your employees that are starting to like build a video repository, or maybe it's just blog, like quick little short form blogs, or maybe it's even a podcast of, highlighting different leaders across the org and asking those questions. But it can't just stop there, where now it's about amplification of how do you actually distribute the content, because now you've curated content. Now, how do you ultimately get that out there so that people are starting to become more aware of who you are? And I would say the most effective way to do that is just leaning on your employees and empowering them to then share stuff with their networks. And of course, LinkedIn is in most cases where talent is living. So really leaning into LinkedIn and being able to help your employees easily share their stories and each other's stories across their networks, across LinkedIn, and of course, any other form that you think candidates are ultimately living and breathing. And that's where you can sort of really start amplifying that message, curating the content. And that's where you're going to start seeing tons of responses come in. And I can almost guarantee you'll go from selling your company to candidates to being those buyers and choosing, once you can start sort of getting your unique, special culture and highlighting your employees across all these different channels.
Yeah, great. And I think I love the human aspect.
Yeah.
Because I think those companies that are brave enough to allow their employees to have personal brands on things like LinkedIn, you get away from that vanilla content that we spoke about earlier. That's actually, it just disappears doesn't cut through the noise. Whereas if you allow your employees personal brand, the best thing about personal branding, it has to be personal. It has to be authentic. You have to write how you speak. That's actually what will engage the right people. And if you have some of your senior leaders doing that, this is people with a wealth of experience that can share a lot of value just from things that they've learned in their career, that then will be the magnet to bringing talent to that business.
Yes.
And then it's about consistency. Because that's what we see, some companies or some people will only post once and then it all disappears for 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between kind of what the employer brand is saying too, of like what the company is portraying on social versus what the employees are portraying on social too. And usually there's a strong disconnect there of, here's our corporate professional sort of brand on our LinkedIn channel, for instance, and then here's some employees posting many different topics, or here's what Glassdoor looks, and it's like two completely disconnected messages. So that typically happens too often, which of course hurts a company to really be able to attract talent and have a consistent, cohesive message.
Yeah. And I liked what you were saying earlier about understanding what the customers want, what the candidate market wants. I think it's understanding maybe their pain, what aren't they getting, or what is going to motivate them to move, and then what is the prize that your company can highlight to bring that talent to your business. And I think what the messaging does is connects those two. It takes you from the pain of what's happening right now to the prize of coming to work for us. And then if you can get those messages consistently out there in the right tone of voice, you will attract the right people that will be kind of your people for your brand.
Yes.
Perfect. So, how did you get into this space? Earlier, you spoke about, it was almost kind of an internal, CultureHQ was more internally focused. How did you kind of make that switch to the external piece?
Yeah. We've had an interesting story, and I'd say we've been fortunate sort of like how the journey has evolved for us, because it's led us to where we are with this employment brand angle. And I think most vendors or technologies that exist haven't sort of had this fortunate kind of journey of starting internal to external, because I think that in today's sort of society and condition and talent market is perfectly aligned. Not to toot our own horn, but for us, when we started 3.5 years ago, we had a personal story where my co-founder and I, we met at Forrester Research, which is a global market research firm. And we met over the ping pong table in the office, which feels like antiquated history, because who's in an office is playing ping pong anymore. It feels like ancient history. But him and I sort of we wouldn't have met if it wasn't for ping pong. That ultimately brought us together, that shared interest, because we were in 2 different departments in a big company. And we really saw the power of a shared interest in being able to cross different boundaries and different, in introducing 2 people together. And for us, we had an interesting story where we not only formed a friendship, but then we helped our 2 teams collaborate more effectively. And then ultimately saw this network effect of how one shared interest brought people together. So we were always kind of thinking about culture from within, of like, how do you help a company build a culture that's really inclusive and bringing to life the unique identities of individuals, because that's where you can start finding all these synergies between people that can form friendships, collaboration, happiness at work. So we thought that way internally of like, how do you bring to life people's unique identities and authentic selves and promote that, and then help them to cross paths with one another to build those types of relationships. So we started that way internally, where it was all about helping people better connect to create a better culture. And as we evolved, and then COVID, of course, comes in and changes everything for everybody. And CultureHQ is in a unique position where it's like, here's this powerful way to help people feel closer together when they're more distant than they ever have been in a remote environment, which is really powerful. But ultimately, what we kept on seeing is that it couldn't just stop from the internal standpoint. It couldn't just be an internal connection tool. It had to be more than that. And as we were talking to HR and talent leaders and so many others, everyone kept on saying, in today's remote environment, we are struggling to tell a message externally on why we're so special. We no longer have the ping pong tables. We no longer have the cool offices and the free food and all these things that used to be a selling point for people to come in and be like, hey, I'm a recruiter, come into our office. And it's like, whoa, this is a cool place. I'd love to work here. Nobody has that anymore. And so then people were telling us like CultureHQ is capturing some really authentic moments of who people are and what the culture is like. It'd be amazing to display that externally, whether it's on our career site or across social. And that's where all of a sudden we saw that CultureHQ it couldn't just stop at internal. It was kind of turning it from the inside out, of being able to help a company really amplify that authentic message through employees from internal to now external, kind of across social and everything. So that was kind of the evolution of CultureHQ.
Yeah, and I love the concept of bringing it to life, because that's it. I think that some people know how amazing their culture is, and it's sometimes the biggest selling point. But if nobody knows about it, or if only it's the secret people that know about it, that work in the business, that love it, they're completely missing the trick. This could be one of the strongest, hiring, assets that you've got, is being able to just showcase what you're all about or what your people are like.
It's the whole kind of mindset of show, don't tell. And I think too often we're just telling, I swear this is the best place. The hiring manager you work with is going to be the best. Like, you're going to have a great experience here. And you have the recruiting team or the marketing team kind of telling that story. And it really changes when you're able to show and not tell. Like, don't take my word for it. Listen to your hiring manager or listen to your team and see kind of the imagery or the videos of them kind of bringing to life the brand in actuality, as compared to me just kind of, being a sales guy and saying, I promise the product is the best, or I promise the culture is the best. It's really powerful to be able to show and not tell, I would say.
Yeah. And then people will watch it and be like, I want to be there. It's a bit of FOMO stuff going on. Why can't I work for that amazing company?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, great. So obviously you mentioned about the pandemic helped pivot your business. Do you think that the pandemic has kind of changed the way people or professionals interact now with social media platforms like LinkedIn?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think what you're seeing, there's been so many new tools that have kind of popped up, and it kind of goes back to my earlier point about the accountability of an organization. And employees now are mobilizing together to interact on social and talk about brands and talk about different elements of experiences. And they're not worried about what the repercussions are. Like before, it was like, if you say anything on social, like you're going to be fired. And in some cases, companies are still trying to do that. They're trying to, put the muzzle on employees to make sure that they don't say anything. But now more than ever, you see employees more mobilizing on LinkedIn and on different social media outlets that are ultimately allowing them to share their unique experiences and perspectives. So now more than ever, it's like employers, they can't put the muzzle on their employees, because they're going to do it, whether it's on LinkedIn or it's on some other social platform that you might not be able to see. It could be more anonymous, like there's Signal and there's these different tools that exist that employees are sharing their experiences. So ultimately, companies have to really like fall into kind of the comfortability zone of being like, you know what, if employees are going to do this anyway, how are we going to make this even more impactful and really have a story that resonates with an audience? So that's where I think today more than ever, like you not only have to do it, but you should do it, because that's where like people are going to hear some sort of message. And actually I think I can share this, where there's an example that came up with a university, and a local university that's very prominent here in the East Coast. And there was an experience where someone on LinkedIn, they posted a job of it was a new job that they were looking for. And in the job, it was talking about the different like responsibilities and what was entitled to like what you had to do for the job, of course. And someone along that thread posted a poll of like, would you ever work here at this university? And there was like, I don't know how many votes, but hundreds of votes that came through of like, no, absolutely not. I would never do that. Never do that role. Like that's ridiculous. And you saw how instantly that basically transformed that role that they just posted on social, on LinkedIn, to try to hire. And then candidates or talent was like, you know what? No way. I would never do that. They took it upon themselves to kind of put that negative message. So now it's like, how do they kind of control the narrative of that and control the message? And so that just kind of shows that it's so important, and you have to be intentional with how you're talking about different roles or the message that you want to put out on social, because people are going to talk anyways. So you better kind of get ahead of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard some quite interesting things as well on, companies being quite proactive with getting the right people to be almost like personal brand ambassadors for their company. So these are quite forward-thinking people that are using, or forward-thinking companies that are using the social channels in the right way. And, I've got, some really good examples now of potential hiring managers with a voice on LinkedIn that are consistently making videos or some really good content around their core experience or their leadership style or whatever it might be. And then when they get a bit of an audience or an echo chamber starts to be created, they have lots and lots of comments, thousands of views and engagements and interactions. And then when you speak to them, those are the guys that seem to be finding it a bit easier to source talent proactively, because they're like, hey, I've got this VP of quality role on, but actually I had 5 people reach out to me that I didn't know before, and they've all just come through my LinkedIn channels. And you're like, okay, cool. So it's definitely working.
Yeah. I think there was a stat that I saw that a hiring manager posting a video about a role or what they're looking for, and it could be 30 seconds, 40 seconds, I think it increases applicants by like 6x. I think it's like you're going to, just by posting kind of a quick video of humanizing yourself and showing your personality, that's allowing you to kind of showcase what's unique, as compared to this, hundreds of other job descriptions. It's like, here are the responsibilities, here's the qualifications. And instead, if you have a video, that's going to increase. And I think it was like, I don't know if it was like 60% more applicants come in if you have a hiring manager video, but it just goes to show like how impactful that is when you kind of humanize elements.
And there's lots of changes to algorithms all the time, as we all know, but like especially with LinkedIn, I think that a company page or a company putting a post out compared to an individual, the reach of an individual is 10x. And then obviously you see people engaging with it that within that network, that then all of a sudden it's within those networks. And again, I think it is the power of being able to curate the right story, be consistent, and ensure that you've actually got a humanized voice. I think that is absolutely key. So in an overly corporate world, you and I know LinkedIn quite well. We're using it from a customer perspective through ourselves as well. But what kind of content do you think could be created by a company that will add a little bit more authenticity? We spoke about videos earlier. Have you got any good examples of things that you would recommend to your kind of customer base?
Yeah, and I think so. There was an example of like when we were starting to evolve into this employment brand, there were some really smart individuals that have been in employer branding for a while. And there's a gentleman here, his name's Ed Nathanson, and I'll reference him because I've had several different calls with him, and he sort of pioneered employer branding in ways like a decade ago when he was at Rapid7, which is a security tech firm or cybersecurity firm here in Boston, headquartered. He was there and pioneered EB, and then ultimately went into his own kind of consultancy to help companies think about employer branding differently. And I remember an example that he had shared where, as he was sort of working with these very large brands or prospecting with very large brands, there was one in particular, Cisco, I think it was, and he openly talks about this. I think it's in different research that he's posted, where Cisco has this very professional corporate brand, or did. They'd probably have changed since this. And they were like very kind of like we're losing talent. Like, how do we kind of compete against all the big players like the Googles and others to get the right talent into our org? And naturally, when you look at their brand versus Google, it was a very different sort of look and feel. And obviously someone's going to choose Google over them because it's like, oh, wow, I'm not going to wear a suit and tie. Like, here's this kind of professional environment. And he very simply was like, well, let's look at your social and your company page and see where you're ultimately posting. And you can see the very like corporate style content that's existing there. And he's like, all right, show me what the best performing post is that you have on your company channel. And I forget what it was, but it was some sponsored ad that they ultimately boosted the post to even put money behind it to get more likes and views and everything. And he's like, I'm going to do something very simple. And I think I'm getting this accurate. We can always double check this, but he ultimately was like, well, let me show you something very simple. I think he went into the cafe and took a picture of like employees congregating like in the cafe, like at an event or something. And he just snapped a photo and then wrote a little write-up and then put like, this is how we do life at Cisco. And it was like a very authentic image and picture of employees kind of like mingling in the cafe. And I think within, a day, it had already like 3x'd the reach of any of their other corporate posts. And it was as simple as just like an authentic image of the employees and just saying like, this is how we do life at Cisco. It was like the first time that they probably thought about doing something more about the employees and something more, unique that people want to see. I mean, because at the end of the day, like, we're humans, like we love to see stories. We love to see like interesting elements of employees' lives and different things, like whether it's on Facebook or Instagram. I mean, TikTok, it's like, you love to see that kind of real, authentic, raw, funny content. But then when you look at companies and what they put out there, it's all like stats, articles, baseline corporate messages. And then when you shift that and like, you know what, let's do some like more interesting elements of like us at an event, us at a team meeting, us of like in an interesting moment of the company's history, sharing a video or highlighting an employee. That content really starts resonating with the audience and being like, wow, that's a cool company. And they treat their employees right. And like I was mentioning earlier, if you're showing that, that's really important, because if you're doing the exact opposite, then you're going to lose customers. Like you're being held to a much different standard when it comes to your kind of employee conditions that you're setting for.
Yeah. And I really like that example. And I think that, you know, having potential candidates almost as like a customer pool for some of your marketing, you know, assets that you're putting out there, it has to be done, because otherwise, as you say, it becomes a little bit too vanilla. It becomes a little bit too samey, like everybody else. These are the stats. This is what our products can do. But actually, it's what can your people do? You know, and they're the ones that, you know, good talent attracts good talent. And then, you know, I think that if you can have your, you know, if you can have your talent at the forefront of your voice or your customer, you know, how you look and feel, that's going to be what draws more talent to your business. I think that's really interesting. Employer branding has been around for a long time, not just over the last 2 years.
All right.
Exactly. Okay, cool. So I'm interested to understand a little bit more about the types of companies that you guys have helped. Can you give us a bit of an insight into like the companies that you've helped and how you've helped them?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're scaling pretty quickly at this point, where the evolution of CultureHQ has changed very rapidly. And really in the past 3-5 months has been where CultureHQ has kind of found its stronghold in this environment of like the inside out, the internal meets external, and how do you tell a message that's ultimately attracting talent? And that's really been fairly new in our evolution of how we've sort of come into the market. So naturally at this point, we just started sort of reaching out to companies a few months ago, and the response was kind of through the roof as far as who was reaching out to us or who was responding. And at first, I mean, we had envisioned that the companies that we would be working with were just going to be scaling up tech companies, right? Like the stereotypical sort of, we have a great culture, we're modern, we have a youthful culture, we need to just get our brand out there too, because we have to grow from 30 to 50 to 100 to 500 to 1,000 very quickly. We thought that that was going to be the only companies that we were going to be working with, which of course is part of our portfolio of customers. But what we ended up seeing is the response was spanning sort of much larger than that. It was not just a 15 employee sort of Series A startup, but it was also unique organizations like higher ed, nonprofits, member-based organizations, industries that sort of are, you know, not known for a youthful culture or a modernized brand, whether it's industrial or manufacturing. We started seeing many different brands kind of reaching out to us and asking like, how do we tell a more authentic story that's going to get talent to come to us? And I think the most interesting thing for one of the customers or like these prospects that we're talking to too, is the brands who had never had trouble before. They would post a job and they would get 500 applicants, you know, within 2 hours. Those companies who had this established brand and still do have an established brand are seeing significant drop off in how many applicants are coming in. They post a job and they may have 20, 50, you know, applicants coming in. And those applicants, unfortunately, are like more lower quality applicants that haven't even looked at the job description, you know, just applied because they saw the brand. So you start seeing these brands who I would have been like, oh yeah, we can't help them. Like everyone knows who they are. They are experiencing very difficult sort of ways to recruit. So companies like in the higher ed industry and, you know, in retail and in others, that's sort of the companies that we're working with. And it's been very surprising to see. And I think what I've learned sort of trying to like wrestle people out of this stigma of like, you don't have to have everything perfect. Everyone just thinks when we're talking about our brand, when we're talking about stories, we have to make sure everything looks polished and perfect. And it's a lot of sort of like wrestling in some cases of being like, relax, like you can have some control over your message, of course. Like you don't want to just have like these raw and unedited, shaky videos going out into the market. But now everyone has an iPhone, everyone has an Android that has an amazing camera on it. And people have grown very accustomed to taking photos and videos, and things are like, people are like their own producers in ways with a lot of social content. So there's that element of like, don't worry so much of the brand that you're trying to portray, and ultimately just capture those stories that's authentic and just get those out there. So I would say the last thing I'll add is that because we're now scaling, we're sort of just seeing kind of this broad range of customers that we're working with. And I'm not sure yet if sort of we're going to have like a stereotypical sort of like one size fits all type customer or persona. I think we're very open to kind of helping anybody, whether you're the most known brand in the room or you're someone that is just trying to make your name known. I think both customers need help to really tell the right message to attract the audience,
100%
market. Yeah.
Cut through that noise. What is it? 18, 19 million live vacancies on LinkedIn right now.
It's huge. Yeah. It's
crazy.
I mean, yeah. Supply and demand is not meeting each other right now.
Exactly. And I really like the message that you said there about consistency, and then done is better than perfect. Yeah. I think in an overly edited world, sometimes these things lose all speed and attraction when it comes to like personal branding or, getting a good video out there. Some people are worrying about it so much that it could have already been launched out, got some engagement and been kicked out the algorithm already, and then waiting on the next thing.
Yeah, so, right.
You're absolutely right. I just think it's like consistency. People then get used to it. People then start to actually, if you get the right personal brands creating content, they start to kind of self-edit or self-regulate and start to improve and work out what's actually going to happen next. I know I've been on a bit of a journey like that recently. So you just start to use those channels more effectively.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. I mean, people, when they see their peers doing other stories and doing videos, I mean, they're sort of holding themselves accountable to what other people are doing next to them or near them. So when you set examples in different tones of like, hey, here's what a story can look like, or here's what a video can look like, and they see their peers doing it, they see their manager doing it, they're going to hold
it becomes normal.
Standard. Yeah, it becomes normal. It's like, it doesn't become like this, you have this rigid process of upload this, edit this, make sure the logo looks like this, make sure the frame is, organized like that. Like you don't have to ultimately do that. And like you were saying, that ultimately loses all speed, and then everything just goes and dies because employees aren't going to do that. They don't have time to be thinking about all these like elements of, make sure you're positioned this way and make sure this is right. And it feels almost too big brothery and too corporate-y when that happens.
And then it's, again, you've lost the human element, and it kind of then there's no point in doing it. Okay, cool. Finally, one question I'd quite like to ask, because obviously you're speaking to a lot of cool people within HR, talent acquisition, that are taking this quite seriously. Otherwise, they wouldn't be engaging with CultureHQ. Have you seen anything from a kind of talent attraction standpoint that is really cool? Have you seen anything where you thought, actually, what those guys are making, that's pretty brilliant?
As far as the content that clients are making and stuff?
Yeah.
I would say yes. And so the perspective here is a little bit different, I would say, where like when you look at what I initially thought was going to be like the cool content and what was going to be like this really high impact stuff. And I think it was because we've all been hardwired to think about these really professionally done videos that are on someone's site, like these great, you might spend 20 grand with video production and equipment, and you have cool music and cool scenes and editing and showing your culture. And right. It's like, that's like what we've grown accustomed to and been hardwired to think that that's the beautiful video. And that's like really powerful, high impact. Well, in actuality, with our tool, because it's about trying to capture more Instagram type moments across your employee base, the sort of nature of the content is super interesting to us because it's like more real, where there's a company that they're out on a hike with their team, and they were bringing up CultureHQ through our mobile app and taking a picture of like, here's culture at such and such company. And they did like a quick video and showing everyone like, woo, or like, we're on this hike type thing. And it was just like very raw and authentic. And, they posted on their site, and you can just see sort of the reaction of what a video like that really lends itself to someone when they're thinking like, oh, that's a team that I want to join. But it was just like I think it was like 15 seconds of them on a hike, that person just opening up the app and being able to just snap a video really quick. And it's like those moments compound on each other, because then other people are showing intimate moments like that from their teams. So it's more like, I would say like it's not just like one video. I think it's being able to see kind of this encapsulation of all these different unique videos of people of what they love to do outside of work, where they grew up, and then getting like why your culture is so dynamic and why it's so fun and unique and what benefits are like. It's seeing all these like quick short element videos or images that, together are telling such a cool story for a company. And that's really what's like making us so excited about the future of CultureHQ, to see all these like individual stories bubbling to the surface in so many ways, whether it's personal or professional, kind of the blend together has been really cool to see.
Yeah, it's great. And it's like, this is what we're actually like. This is actually the
Right.
real people that work for this business, having a nice time, climbing a mountain or whatever they're doing. But this is it, rather than the kind of the corporate, photo with the tie on and the suit and a quote underneath. It's there is space for those, obviously, but even myself as a company owner, every employee that we have hired in the last 3 or 4 years has looked at our Instagram, and they feel like they know us before they're even coming into the interview process.
Really cool. Yeah, that's powerful.
It is. We've got a slightly different age range. I think now you've got lots of people on all different platforms, from, baby boomers through to kind of the millennials now are either on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Everybody's on LinkedIn pretty much in between that from a professional standpoint. So yeah, we've got so many different channels. You just got to curate the right stuff for the right platform.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think that's what's going to help you find the right people. That's going to help you ultimately ensure that there is a transparent element of hiring, so that when someone actually joins your company, if you're just portraying one way, and then you're going to attract certain people that are going to be like, oh, this is like a very professional environment. This is, you're going to attract those people. Then they come in, and then they show up on day one. It's like, wait, people are hiking. People are doing this. I don't know if this is the right culture for me. And
There's
then they leave
TikTok dance happening in the background. What's going on here?
Like you're going to have no good alignment there. And that's ultimately going to, cost you way more money in the long term, because you're going to be losing people after 3 months, 6 months, because they'll be like, this isn't the right place that I was sold in the interviewing process or what I saw on social. So you got to really align that. It's really important, of course.
I mean, this has been fantastic. I have been writing down notes galore. And I think that the real message that's coming out here, though, is, bring your culture to life. People are going to want to join your company if they can see your people authentically. And the way to do that is to consistently, get the message out there, understand what this particular candidate base wants, and just make sure that you're creating the right stuff. Don't over curate it. Just be, as you said, be consistent and make sure you're getting the right videos out on the right channels.
Yeah, 100%. And the last thing I'll mention too is that I think when some people who haven't done this before, and they're trying to get buy-in for budget or trying to get their leadership team on board with getting messages out there, I think employer brand sometimes is only put it in a little bucket where it's like, oh, this is only for talent. Ultimately, employment brand, like we've talked about through the podcast today, it does way more than that. It's really ultimately impacting your consumer brand as well. So like, as far as like measurable outcomes of what can happen if you do this right is significant. It's not only going to help you attract the right people, reduce hiring costs and staffing agency costs and all that, and help you make sure you get people that want to stick around for a long time. But it's ultimately, if you do this messaging right, customers and brands are going to be like, whoa, that is an amazing place. And you're going to actually see a lot of new customers coming in. And I think Qualtrics was an example where Qualtrics I think, I don't know what the percentage was, but they saw, I think, over 50% of new prospects coming in was actually through their employment brand messaging rather than their consumer brand messaging. So there really is, like, if you do this right, it's not just like a nice thing to do or a fun thing to do. This is actually going to help you change your business, both from a talent angle and from a customer standpoint too.
Yeah, great. Last question. What are you excited about for the future?
Good question. Yeah. I mean, gosh, CultureHQ has been on I think every startup's like, oh, we have a cliche, right? It's like our journey is like very unique and different. But we've been on this journey where we really wanted to make an impact in some sort of realm within culture. And I'm just so excited for, like, COVID changed everything for everybody. There's so much fear and worry and everything of like, is this the new normal, of like, what is the pandemic ultimately going to shift and change? But you've seen this evolution of how employers are really treating their employees more intentionally. And so I'm just excited that sort of that mindset has shifted, where things like diversity and inclusion and societal change and social responsibility, these things have really become forefront to people wanting to enact change. So that's really exciting to me, where there's so many new elements that people are prioritizing in this new future of work. And I'm excited for CultureHQ to kind of play a part in that, of really kind of shifting workforces today and really kind of like bringing to life people's unique identities and unique stories, and not putting a muzzle on people, but ultimately giving them a microphone and being able to amplify that. Because I mean, how powerful if we can be able to see all these unique stories of people working kind of in unique locations, remote, flexible workplaces, and just seeing all these kind of identities and perspectives within the workplace. I think that's so powerful to be able to, like, just, I don't know, be in it, because work is consumes 75% of your time.
Yep.
And I feel like if we can be able to see this kind of authentic view of people working and see these stories, I mean, that just really excites me to be able to see like how people are interacting with each other and how employers are ultimately treating their employees in a much more kind of inclusive, intentional way.
Yeah. And if you have hired them in the first place, you got to trust them that they've got your values and that they should have a microphone. The spotlight should be on them. The trust should be there to go and tell the story.
Right. Yeah. That's
great. Perfect. So, Brian, I'm super thankful. This has been absolutely brilliant. I hope everybody has enjoyed it. Now, for our listeners, if they wanted to get in touch with you or understand more about yourself, more about CultureHQ, how can they reach out to you?
So you can reach out to me via email, which is just brian@culturehq.com. You can also check out our website, culturehq.com. But then we also have our kind of curated landing page of content from our team and some stories that we're ultimately building out. So you can visit our kind of curated page, which is team.culturehq.com. And you can start learning more about me, and my profile's on there. So you can learn more about my personal and professional kind of experiences at my workplace. So that's certainly one way that you can kind of see, what CultureHQ is up to too, and get to know more about me.
Perfect. Thank you. Again, thank you very much for spending the time with us today. I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.
Cheers.